It's great to be here. You folks, I think, in this community are really lucky to have a leader like you do here and an organization like Silicon Valley Clean Energy. You guys really are a lead among energy providers across California. So thank you for having me down. It's great to be here. I do run an organization called the Building Decarbonization Coalition. It's a coalition of energy providers, manufacturers, builders, designers, finance, local government, and NGOs across California. And we work on trying to completely eliminate greenhouse gas emissions from the built environment through both policy mechanisms and through market solutions. Silicon Valley Clean Energy is a member. Thank you for your membership and your leadership in this space. And I got to say, you guys probably have the best director of decarbonization in the state, and Miss Amy Bailey right here as well. So I want to talk to you tonight about something as ubiquitous as horses in the turn of the last century in New York, as ubiquitous as cell phones in your life right now. I want to talk to you about natural gas. Wonderful, beautiful natural gas, as you can see, helps relationships. Kids love it. And it'll make you beautiful. Handsome is as handsome does, that's the gas idea. I didn't know that they had coined that. So I want to talk to you about natural gas tonight. And increasingly, what I'm going to talk to you about is why building decarbonization is coming up now, and why gas is playing an increasingly important role in our conversation in California, and what are its implications for us as communities, and what we're going to be seeing coming down the pike as far as changes in the design of our communities and our energy systems. So really, when we're talking about natural gas, the reason it's becoming more and more of a concern is that it's actually methane. Natural gas is made up of 92 to 98% methane. The rest of it is some other pollutants, some other additives, but ultimately what we're talking about is methane. And we're concerned about methane because methane is a super pollutant when you look at it from a greenhouse gas perspective. 84 times more effective at capturing heat, retarding the movement of heat than, skipped ahead one on me, than CO2. So incredibly more effective than CO2 from a greenhouse gas perspective. And the reason we're concerned about this is because California imports most of its natural gas. And we import it from states that have much different laws around air quality and water quality than what we have. And so anytime you have a leakage rate over 2% for natural gas, it completely negates any climate change benefit from using it as a fuel. Anytime you have a leakage rate over 3%, it doubles the climate change impact from that gas. And so the Environmental Defense Fund, one second, almost. The Environmental Defense Fund hired the top infrared pilot company in the country, and they flew over 10,000 different well sites for the extraction of natural gas across the United States. And you're going to see some of the footage they filmed from the Barnett Shale in Texas, where we get about a quarter of our natural gas. And what you're going to see is something that looks like smoke coming out of storage tanks and extraction tanks. What this actually is, this is methane being released. Nick, it's all you. All of that stuff that looks like smoke is actually methane, and this is not uncommon. Across storage facilities, extraction facilities across the United States, at gas and oil fields, you have massive amounts of methane, the super pollutant for climate change, escaping into the atmosphere. At the end of the Obama administration, they tried to put in new laws around methane capture, and the Trump administration, when they came in, stopped that proceeding. It's in courts right now, but whether or not we move forward on that. So as I said, we import about 85% of our natural gas from Canada, the Midwest, and Texas. And they do not have concerns, at least laws that reflect concerns about air quality like we do. And so when we think about the natural gas that we use, are coming from extraction practices that are decimating from a climate change perspective. And so this looks at a whole series. This is a map of the leakage rates at all the different natural gas basins across the United States. And these are different studies that looked at those leakage rates from each of those basins. And the leakage rate is a combination of the mix of regulatory environment mixed with the geology of that area. Here is what it looks like from a California perspective. The first column on the left is all the different basins that California gets its natural gas from. The second column is what portion of California's supply comes from that basin. And then the leakage rate, the average leakage rate as a percentage of overall production from that basin. Ultimately, the important thing, let's have a laser, is this. We have about a 3.6% leakage rate for the extraction and transmission to California for natural gas, meaning that not only does it have no climate benefit for its use compared to other fuels, but its impact is actually double due to the leakage of this fuel. This is Jennifer. She works at Acclima. They're a fantastic company right down here in Silicon Valley, and that's a Google Street View car. And they put these air quality sensors in the back of Google Street View cars and drive them all over communities, making these beautiful maps of tragic information. And what they measure is different kinds of air quality pollution. And this is a map of transportation-related pollution, particularly nitrous oxides in San Francisco, using these maps, driving around. I think this is about a year's worth of data that they captured, looking at different pollution levels. They also look at methane and methane release. So I talked a lot about where we get our methane from and how it gets over to us. We're starting to look more and more about the methane releases here in California. And they drove around for about 6 months in Southern California. They picked 4 communities, and each one of these dots represents a leak in the gas system. And the little yellow dots mean it's the equivalent of driving a car. It's a greenhouse gas equivalent of driving a car for 5,000 miles in one day. The orange dots are the equivalent of driving a car for 9,000 miles in one day. And the red dots, which is from here to India. And the orange and the red dots are over 9,000 miles in one day, and that can be a pretty significant disparity between each one of them. And so what we're finding is that we have some pretty bad leaks in our system. The California Public Utilities Commission says we have about a 0.5% leakage rate across California in our gas system. And then in our homes, we have about a 0.5% leakage rate. We live in little bubbles of methane in our homes on average, according to the California Energy Commission. So combined about 1% in California, 3.6% from the transmission and extraction, we're upwards of 4% leakage rate from the extraction of gas into our lifestyles. Here's Boston, where they had those terrible explosions at the end of last year, about 40 miles north. Other communities with much older gas systems this is a much bigger issue, with Boston being in the lead of one of the main culprits for gas leaks. Another way of looking at it, we're starting to see beautiful graphs like this, which each one of those yellow lines represents a leak, and the height of that line represents the amount of the rate of the leakage. This is Boston again. And so what we're finding is we live with an incredibly leaky system, leaking a super pollutant into the environment that's really exacerbating climate change. If you want a really depressing Twitter follow, I highly recommend Gas Watchdog. It is a non-Russian bot that follows all of the public stories, all of the media articles about gas leaks around the world, and immediately pops it up. And it's depressing for the regularity of how many stories come up every single day about gas leaks across this country and across this world. So you're going to hear a lot in this issue of decarbonization about choice. And I'm going to talk about one of the other choices to take beyond electrification. But I'm just going to go over some of the things you might want to consider when you're thinking about choice and whether or not to choose, when you're decarbonizing your building stock, electricity versus, say, something else. So in California, we basically use natural gas to heat our space, heat our water, heat our food, and 50% of us use it to heat our clothes as well. So the choice we have is, instead of using natural gas, we use this increasingly renewable forms of electricity combined with really highly efficient technology like heat pumps that I'll talk about and induction stoves in order to heat our lifestyles instead. So here are some of the considerations. Let's look at cost. When you look at the cost of putting gas infrastructure into a house, it costs between about $6,000 to $15,000 to bring the infrastructure in, to permit it, and for all the planning to be able to get it to a house. You look at the plumbing of what it takes to actually then plumb that gas through the house, anywhere from $750 to $2,400, depending on the size and the design. And then the venting, because when you burn gas in your homes, it produces dangerous toxic gases that I'll talk about, and you need to vent it out by law, because we've recognized this, and it can cost just under $1,000 to vent it all out. The National Association of Home Builders, the Trade Association of Home Builders in the United States, puts out a report every year called Priced Out, where they look at the impact of increased cost of homes and families' ability to be able to afford to buy a home. They look at every state and 350 major metropolitan areas, and every year they put out a report. And for 2019, they said for every $1,000 that you increase a house price in California, you're pricing out just under 10,000 families to be able to afford a house. So if we're choosing to put in gas, and it is a choice because we can do it all electric, then what does that impact on a community and in a state that's living in a housing crisis? Say we use the low end of those costs, about $7,000 per home, almost 10,000 families per $1,000 priced out. We're talking about pricing almost 60,000 families out of the ability to buy a home in California because we've chosen to put in gas rather than electric. We're all going to have electric anyway. We're choosing to put in gas to our homes. So you might ask, well, this electric technology and the appliances, do they cost more? Absolutely not. California's Trade Association for Home Builders, the California Building Industry Association, put out a report last year that says these all-electric appliances, they cost the same or cheaper than gas appliances to heat your space, to heat your water, to cook your food. And that the home builders here are saying that you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 60% for new homes building with the current grid renewable energy supply. If you want to ask about non-residential buildings, an organization called Energy Point did a report for the UC Office of the President. The University of California has adopted a carbon neutral policy across their entire 8 campuses. By 2025, they're going to be completely carbon neutral is what they're shooting for. And so Point Energy, a big engineering firm up in San Francisco, did a study about what does it cost to build all electric compared to gas, and what does it cost to operate it. And so this looks at academic buildings, and you could just say that pretty much counts for office buildings as well, residential buildings and laboratory buildings. The yellow represents the energy costs of operating that building, and the blue, the capital costs of building the building. And so in each one of these, for academic buildings, we have gas and electric versus all electric, gas and electric residential versus all electric, and laboratories. And this is the cost right here of building and operating. What they found is that for non-residential buildings, you have either the same cost or cheaper to build all electric than to build with gas. And this starts to play into equity as well. Here in California, 15% of our families live in energy poverty, meaning they spend more than 20% of their income on utility bills. Utility bills are the #1 reason for payday loans in California and across the nation. And so the ability of a family to manage their expenses is incredibly important to be able to keep above the line and be able to pay off everything else within their lifestyle and their families. And increasingly, we're finding that natural gas is not a good partner in the ability to be able to manage costs. This is the price of gas in California from April 2018 until April of this year, over the last year. And what you can see is a completely unreliable price for a commodity that's critical for over 90% of our families in California that rely on gas for the heating. You cannot plan for those kind of price swings within your monthly budget. And what are you having to cut when you're having to pay these increased costs that we have no control over? What happened in February and March of this year in the rest of the country? Polar vortex. You saw where we get our natural gas from. We compete for that same natural gas with those other communities. Last year was a record year for natural gas use until this year, which is a record year for natural gas use, largely because of events like that. And we'll be increasingly competing in a reality of climate change. They're about to be hit by a bomb cyclone this week across the Midwest. They're talking about 20 to 30 inches of snow in North Dakota and Minnesota this week in the middle of April. We're going to be increasingly competing for this same natural gas and paying these high prices in the future. This is only exacerbated as we're starting to understand how unsafe our gas system is and the cost of maintaining a gas system. This is Southern California Gas Company. I know you guys don't care. This is not your gas company. But this is Southern California Gas Company's rate request to the Public Utilities Commission for the next 3 years. PG&E already went through this because of San Bruno, and they're already embedded it into their gas prices. Southern California Gas Company is asking for a 45% increase in their gas prices over the next 3 years. And remember, they don't produce much of their own natural gas. This is for being able to actually maintain this system at a safe level for California with our new understanding of just how leaky our systems are. And so increasingly, these high prices are going to be going even higher. Whereas electricity, we've done a great job in California at keeping it steady. You might not be happy about the price we've kept it steady at, but we've done a great job of keeping electricity prices steady. This is over the last 20 years in California, the average for overall electricity prices across the state for all sectors. So this is something that a family can actually plan on. We have much more control in California over the prices for electricity than we do over natural gas. And heat pump technology helps with that. How many of you use heat pump technology in your house? How many of you have a refrigerator in your house? That's heat pump technology. Not the same thing, but it's basically the same thing. It's using a condenser and refrigerant to be able to move heat from one space to another. For a refrigerator, you're taking heat outside of the inside of that box. You put your hand on the back of that box, and there's heat coming off of the back of it going into your kitchen or wherever you keep your refrigerator. It's the same thing with heat pumps. You can use that same technology to heat water or to cool or heat space, depending what you want. The beauty of heat pumps, they're 4 to 5 times more efficient than the best gas appliance you can buy for the same purpose, and they're grid interactive. Meaning when we have a ton of solar during the middle of the day in California, you can preheat your water or pre-cool or heat your house to be ready when you come home and not have to do it at peak when the energy is the dirtiest and the most expensive. So health is increasingly becoming more of a concern with natural gas. Nitrous oxide are a toxic gas. They can cause asthma at high levels in otherwise healthy adults. And for people with asthma, it's one of the leading triggers of asthma attacks and one of the leading contributors to smog. California, we have air basins like the LA Air Basin, the San Joaquin Valley that have never been in compliance with the Clean Air Act and the history of the Clean Air Act. 1 in 7 California children have asthma. 1 in 6 in the Central Valley suffer from asthma. In California, our power plants have done a really great job about controlling this toxic gas. It only emits about 18 tons a day of nitrous oxides from our power plants. The combustion of gas in our buildings leads to the emissions of 6 times that amount of nitrous oxides within our communities. We do not have good pollution controls on our appliances in our house like we do on our power plants. You might ask about cars. Cars come in just barely more than our buildings. The entire fleet of cars comes in just barely more than our buildings from a nitrous oxide pollution standpoint. Freight, much higher and a really big problem, but buildings increasingly one that we can much more effectively and economically manage than some of these other sectors. Now, about slide 6, I think half of you, or maybe a third of you, kind of sat back in your chair and crossed your arms because I mentioned cooking. And you said, you know, I care about the future, my kids, yada, yada. All this other stuff sounds good. There's no way I'm giving up my gas stove. So here's some depressing information. This is a study right here at the bottom from Lawrence Berkeley Labs. Dr. Singer leads a group at Lawrence Berkeley Labs that focuses on indoor air quality of cooking. And what Dr. Singer, this is a study that looked at 60,000 homes, they modeled 60,000 homes in Southern California about what were the air quality impacts of cooking with gas. And what they found is that over half of those 60,000 homes, and then they extrapolated that out to about 12 million Californians, are exposed to levels of pollutants, particularly nitrous oxides and carbon monoxide and formaldehyde, that exceed allowable outside air levels of pollution. Dr. Singer said, if these kind of levels of pollution were found outside, there would be criminal proceedings against the source of this pollution. But because these are inside people's homes, there's nothing we can do about it. I already talked about nitrous oxides, carbon monoxide. There's a reason why we have the carbon monoxide alarms required in everybody's homes ever since the Carbon Monoxide Pollution Act of 2010 in California, because it tells you that you need to air out your house because there's a poisonous gas that's about to kill your family or your pets. And then formaldehyde, the leading cause of childhood and pet leukemia. 1 in 3 children that get childhood leukemia die from it. About half the pets that get pet leukemia die from it. And formaldehyde is a leading cause of that. The Air Resources Board has already produced some information about the dangers of cooking with gas. They focus on chicken. I don't think it's only chicken. But they talk about how cooking with gas will exceed allowable levels of air quality. And they have a pretty, I think, pretty funny set of recommendations about what to do about it. They say, have your gas stove maintained by a professional every year. Who has their gas stove maintained by a professional every year? Anybody? No. They say, I really love number 3, use heat-proof side shields along with an exhaust hood. So all of you have your little side shields at home up on your gas stove. Anybody cook in a laboratory for home? And then my favorite is the very last one. Consider microwaving food when possible. Just forget about it. Thank you, Air Board, for the help. But even this one right here, self-cleaning. This is one of the leading cause of formaldehyde is the self-cleaning mode. So, and I like this one, self-cleaning, leave. Just leave and well ventilate for the first hour or 2. This is from our Air Board. I'm not talking about this. This is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about going back to this technology. What we're talking about is this. We're talking about magnetic induction cooking, the electric vehicle of your kitchen. So the way induction cooking works is it uses electromagnetic fields to be able to directly heat the part of the pan that is over the magnets. Natural gas stoves are only about 30% efficient because the heat escapes out from around the sides of the pans, whereas induction cooking directly heats, is 90% efficient, directly heats just a part of the pan directly over the magnets. Incredibly efficient and starting to be more and more loved by chefs. Chefs like French Laundry, Café Facelli, which is represented in the United States in the French Pastry Championships the last 5 years. Great British Bake Off, there's Wolfgang Puck cooking on one, and the culinary master, Guy Ferrari, with his induction stove right there. The reason cooks love it are 2 main reasons. Power. Significantly more powerful than gas. It can boil a pot of water in half the time of a gas range. And control. Amazing control. High levels of control, low levels of control. How many of you can cook chocolate in a single pan? Many of you, if you cook chocolate, you have to actually cook chocolate in a double pan. This is one of many experiments you do with induction cooking. You cut a pan in half, you put an egg or a piece of chocolate on it, and you can see the safety of induction cooking. Induction cooking only heats directly when a pan is over it, when the electromagnetic field is hitting something metal. And so the pan is hot, but right next to it is not hot. And these are some of the reasons why Consumer Reports loves induction cooking. These are the top ranges for 2018 from Consumer Reports. And you can see that 9 of the top 10 are electric, different kinds of electric, induction, electric smooth top. 2 of the top 10 are induction, and a wide price range from all the different induction ranges. The top gas one for last year was a $3,000 model that scored a lowly 81 out of 100 when compared. Consumer Reports looks at durability, performance, cleanability, features, clearly preferring induction cooking. So, they're cleaner. How many of you love cleaning up your gas stove? Digging in between the different pieces of it? With induction, you spray it, you wipe, you're done. Safer. No elderly relative or young child is going to turn your gas stove on and cause a potential for a fire, like that terrible Brooklyn apartment fire 2 years ago that burned down an apartment building and killed 24 people from a 2-year-old. Far better control. It's cooler. Commercial kitchens with induction stoves, nowhere near the heat in there. There's going to be new laws coming out from Cal OSHA around heat stress and heat fatigue that's going to be pushing this technology in kitchens a lot more. Easier to clean, and then, as you can see, this is what really improves relationships, not gas. My community cooks with a lot of woks. Don't worry, wok-shaped induction stoves. Can you do tortillas on it? Absolutely can cook tortillas on it, and it's the best pozole you'll ever cook in your life. Because of the amazing control, you're able to keep it at a low temperature that it needs in order to be able to simmer and fully pull out all of the flavors from all the different ingredients to make the best stew of your life. Studies have shown, though, that humans like the fire. So Samsung has produced a model that has a false flame that wraps around the front of the pan to be able to give you that feeling of fire in there. So lastly, climate. This is a chart that just shows right here, it shows all the greenhouse gas emissions in the state and where they come from a perspective of end use. So instead of looking at it, you don't see power plants on here, because what we're looking at the electricity in California. Most of it is used in buildings, a little bit of manufacturing, a little bit of agriculture. You know, petroleum is for cars and other transportation. So this is an end use look at greenhouse gas emissions and where they come from. And what we're finding is that buildings are the second largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions from an end use perspective. And so this is the electricity used, this is natural gas, and this is refrigerants escaping from our air conditioning systems right here. So buildings are going to be an incredibly important part if we're able to avoid catastrophic climate change. We've done a good job on electricity. That's this line. This is from 2000 to 2016. These are greenhouse gas emissions from the different sectors, actually where you combust the fuel to be able to create the greenhouse gas emissions. And on electricity, we've done a good job. We've dramatically lowered greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity sector through the building of renewables, shutting down old gas plants, and getting rid of old coal contracts. What happened? What big innovation happened in 2015 in transportation? Rideshare. During the week, about 8% increased VMT from rideshare from idling, and during weekends, about 10% increase of VMT from rideshare. I do rideshare, I'm not demonizing rideshare, but we're going to have to address it because it's starting to have a pretty significant effect on our climate change planning as well as our transportation systems. If you look at it from the actual burning of fuel and where we burn it and what's creating the greenhouse gas emissions, you have electricity, our in-state electricity. The power plants here in California produce about 10% of all of our greenhouse gas emissions. You combine residential and commercial, it's about 12%. So our buildings are producing more greenhouse gas emissions than our entire fleet of power plants in California, and more criteria pollutants than our entire fleet of power plants across California. So as we move towards trying to find a way to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, here's really our choices. We're going to be getting to, by law, zero carbon electricity by 2045 here in California. And so if we do that, and we do nothing on gas, eventually by 2045, these are greenhouse gas emissions from the building stock, eventually we can get down to zero carbon electricity. We're still going to have gas creating greenhouse gas emissions. Or we could be switching over to all electric buildings and completely zeroing out greenhouse gas emissions from the built environment. The beauty here is that in the time frame we're talking about, 2045, we're probably not going to have to force people to make a lot of tough decisions. And the reason why is because your stuff breaks. Your water heater breaks every 8 to 12 years. Your furnace breaks about every 15 to 20 years. Over the time frame we're talking about to avoid catastrophic climate change, your stuff's going to break. And it's going to be about how can Silicon Valley Clean Energy be able to create the right market conditions so that they can help you make better decisions around the purchasing of all electric appliances to run off of their clean electricity rather than natural gas appliances, which are crippling our climate change fight. Now, here's that other choice, biogas. You're going to hear a lot about it. Biogas, biomethane, renewable natural gas. Here's the reality on this. This comes from dairies, and this comes from landfills and using woody waste and agricultural waste to create gas that we then pump into our pipelines. The Energy Commission released a report a couple years ago and looking at the availability of biogas for California. So this is a chart that shows how much natural gas we use in California, and then how much biogas is available to replace that natural gas and the costs of these different options. So in 2015 in California, and you combine all of our buildings and industry, we used about 1.6 quadrillion BTUs of natural gas. If we achieved unimaginable levels of energy efficiency in buildings and industry, levels that we've never achieved in California, and had business as usual growth out to 2050, we're looking at still about 1 quadrillion BTUs of demand for natural gas. This is how much biogas we can produce if we completely exploited biogas resources in California and used them only for buildings. Didn't use any of it for transportation, aviation, anything else, use it only for buildings. We can produce about 0.2 quadrillion BTUs. Say we went out to the rest of the country and exploited our population share. We took everything from Ohio, Florida, everywhere else. We took our 11% of all the biogas materials in the country and brought them into California. We could produce about 0.6 quadrillion BTUs of biogas. Even with unimaginable levels of energy efficiency, there's always going to be a gap between what biogas can provide and what we need here in California, even under the rosiest scenarios. Having a reliance on biogas means a reliance into the future of fossil natural gas. It's a false promise for a climate change future, and at prices that are just completely unacceptable to any ratepayer or politician. Current biogas prices at about $10. You saw we pay about $6 a million metric BTU right now. We're talking about prices of $30 to $100 for that instead. Completely unaffordable solution, and really a unicorn from the gas industry. So you're going to start to see more and more programs like this. No pressure, Amy, on this one. Sacramento Municipal Utility District, they're giving $5,000 per home to go build all electric, almost $14,000 per home to renovate your home. Appliance by appliance, or if you do everything, they'll give you an extra kicker plus some energy efficiency on top of it. You're going to see more and more programs like this. The Public Utilities Commission is moving towards financing, incentives, and market transformation around this. And they have officially announced that they're going to be moving their $1 billion a year of energy efficiency money away from a focus only on energy efficiency savings and over to also greenhouse gas savings focus, which is going to be encouraging electrification of buildings. The Energy Commission got a lot of attention for requiring solar in the new building code. In the next building code, they're going to be incorporating greenhouse gas emissions into the building code like we've never seen before, and starting to require measures that are going to be encouraging electrification of buildings. And then right here in Silicon Valley and across California, we have about 40 different communities that are considering adopting mandatory codes to require building decarbonization across the state. On Friday, LA County announced that by 2021, they'll adopt across the entirety of LA County a mandatory building decarbonization code. And next week, Mayor Garcetti in LA will announce the same thing for the city of LA, a mandatory code by 2021 for new construction and existing buildings. Sacramento, San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, maybe some in this room, going to be making similar announcements as we work towards building decarbonization codes across the state. So to sum up, electric buildings, cheaper, more equitable for our communities, healthier, more climate friendly, and safer. There's not a good reason to be building with gas right now for any of these reasons. And that's why we're seeing more and more of these. The Tesla Design Center and SpaceX, all electric. Here's Elon's chef, Ted Kisma, head chef at SpaceX with their all electric staff cafeteria. Stanford will be completely, Stanford alums, will be completely carbon neutral by the end of 2019. This is their central plant. They're completely switching over. The new Google headquarters, the largest geothermal system, geothermal heat pump system in the country. And then the Exploratorium in San Francisco, completely all electric, tons of solar, carbon neutral. The Bradley terminal in Los Angeles, International Bradley Terminal, 29 food vendors, all electric. And then the Packard headquarters, another example. There's some beautiful examples of all electric buildings already built, already operating. You don't hear about them just because they're buildings. Why talk about them? Can we make dramatic change in a short amount of time? This is Easter morning, 1900, Fifth Avenue, New York. There's one automobile in this picture. This was 13 years later. There's one horse right there. Completely technology, completely transformed the city. Probably not in the best way, but we went from one form of transportation to a completely different form of transportation in just 13 years. Think of how much this one technology of the smartphone has completely changed our culture and our society. What we're talking about is something that you don't even care about. Your heater, your water heater. That's what the majority of what we're talking about here. You don't care about that right now. We can make those changes much easier than the changes I just talked to you about than that. So I come from a community that has suffered from climate change. I live up in Sonoma County. When on October 9th of 2017, I got a call from my kid's school that it was shut down because of a fire. It ended up being the largest fire in California state history. Like many of you, we spent a week inside because the air outside was too sick to breathe. And now that was 18 months later, that's now the fourth largest fire in California history. We're averaging a community every 6 months is burning down in California. It's no longer theoretical what climate change is, we're feeling it right now. And if we're going to address this, and if we're going to stop having some of the worst air quality in the world in the fall, then buildings are going to have to be on the forefront of it. And leadership of the communities that make up Silicon Valley Clean Energy and the Silicon Valley are going to have to be the lead on making sure the buildings are a critical part of the solution. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to the dialogue and the continued leadership from this area. Thank you. Maybe like one or two? Yeah. And I'm happy to talk outside while folks got to set this up in here. Yep. Please.
On your vertical bar chart, you showed that buildings had a pretty high percentage of natural gas use, but right above that was refrigerants. And so my concern is about all the people moving to heat pumps and the refrigerants that are in there. How's that going to change the refrigerant part of bar?
Yeah, that's a great question. So refrigerants, the current use of refrigerants in most air conditioners and a lot of heat pumps have a really high global warming potential. Because they're so efficient, they're still a better option than natural gas, but we do have to deal with these refrigerants. There's starting to be some that are using low global warming potential refrigerants like CO2, but ultimately there's a law here in California that by 2022, the Air Resources Board is going to be putting out standards around refrigerants and starting to actually dramatically scale down the greenhouse gas impact from refrigerants. So we're going to have to, I work with a lot of manufacturers, they're not doing it voluntarily. And so it's going to be the Air Board really putting in rules to drill those down. So that's pretty recent. We're not going to make dramatic change to have a lot more heat pumps over the next 3 years, sadly. So I think we have regulations coming in at a good time to help out with that. Yep. One last question?
What do you mean by
Leakages? Yeah, so you're talking about all those maps I showed? Yeah, so I don't know if you noticed it, but we do have some earthquakes here in California. Managing a set of pipes inside buildings and inside a geology that is incredibly unstable, we found it to be very hard to do in a safe way. And so you have everything from little pinhole leaks to very large leaks, as you saw from that map of the Southern California communities. And it can be caused from any number of things. There's no, I don't think I've seen any study where it says these are the main culprits for why we have different levels of leaks. But across the board, we do have significant leakage across the system. So these are holes in our pipelines, whether a transmission or distribution. And then one of the worst holes we've found is when the gas main goes into your house. After years and years of water dripping directly onto the pipe, and this is what happened to us when we moved into our house, we had to immediately replace that pipe because of the corrosion right there. So that's what I mean. by leakage.
But in the short term, why can't we pass some laws to fix this leakage?
Yeah, we're investing billions of dollars into that right now. And so one thing I didn't talk about is the fact that we're investing billions of dollars into fixing those leaks right now. And in reality, we're probably going to be shutting down many of those same pipes that we're fixing over the next 20 to 30 years because of our march towards our climate goals. So those billions of dollars, we're basically pouring it in a hole in the ground. Yeah. On that note, thanks for coming out. Have a great board meeting, and thanks again for having me. Happy to talk to folks outside as well.